Hey guys, tonight we are slipping into something silky, lazy, and a little tipsy. The story of how a Greek god accidentally invented theatre just to get out of doing his job. You're in a field of ripening grapes, the evening air sweet and heavy, and somewhere nearby, a flute plays a tune that sounds like laughter turning into a sigh. A figure reclines under the vines, half asleep, half divine, with purple stains on his lips and a look that says, I could work, but why would I? You're looking at Dionysus, god of wine, chaos, and questionable life choices. He's technically on Olympus's payroll, but productivity isn't exactly his brand. He prefers long naps, dramatic storytelling, and the occasional mortal festival where everyone pretends the hangover is a religious experience. You can tell right away this isn't a Zeus kind of god. No thunderbolts, no paperwork, no divine HR forms. Just blissful avoidance wrapped in grape leaves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start beside Dionysus, and is clearly trying to look busy. There's a scroll open near him, some rough sketches of vines and theatre masks scrawled in wine stains. Every so often, he sighs and mutters something about creative inspiration, but mostly, he's dodging Zeus's reminders about divine duties. The problem is, on Olympus, you're expected to contribute. Athena invents things. Apollo writes poetry. Hermes delivers stuff. Dionysus, he tests grapes for quality assurance. He once tried to justify it by saying, someone must ensure the people are happy. But the truth? He just didn't want to work. Ancient myths hint that even as a baby, he was trouble, a child born of Zeus's affair, smuggled into safety, raised by nymphs, and later roaming the world teaching mortals how to make wine. A noble mission, sure, but one that suspiciously involves a lot of naps. You imagine him traveling across ancient Greece, a little entourage trailing behind him, satyrs, nymphs, and the occasional mortal who quit their job to join the cult of vibes. They dance, drink, and call it spiritual enlightenment. And somehow, it works. The mortals adore him. Not because he promises riches or power, but because he gives them permission to relax. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's cult was about divine ecstasy or just an excuse for socially acceptable partying. The rituals were wild but structured, sacred yet scandalous. Picture candlelight flickering off bronze cups, the air thick with incense and laughter, everyone swaying between trance and intoxication. You're not sure if this is worship or a really dedicated drama club. And that's where the lazy genius strikes. Dionysus notices something. When people drink, they start telling stories. They exaggerate, gesture wildly, laugh at the wrong moments, and somehow, truth leaks out through the chaos. So he leans back, lets out a sigh that sounds suspiciously like a yawn, and decides maybe storytelling could count as divine labor. It's a brilliant loophole. If he can turn drinking and performing into a sacred act, then every festival in his honor becomes an official duty. Suddenly, procrastination becomes productivity. Zeus can't complain. After all, it's religious outreach. You can almost hear him reasoning it out in his own lazy logic. If people act out their feelings for me, then technically, I'm managing emotions. That's therapy. Therapy is work. One mainstream fact, the Greeks really did celebrate Dionysus through festivals like the rural Dionysia and later the city Dionysia in Athens, where entire communities came together for days of feasting, singing, and plays. It was sacred, civic, and yes, very boozy. A quirkier tidbit. According to one myth, Dionysus once disguised himself as a mortal theatre critic, wandering from town to town just to see who performed his praises best. He'd sit in the crowd, nodding sagely, occasionally heckling the actors if they forgot to thank him. A divine Yelp reviewer with grapes in his hair. But even gods need a reason to get out of bed, or vine hammock, in this case. And Dionysus's reason slowly morphs from avoid responsibility to curate the best festival on earth. It's not work if you enjoy it, right? As night deepens, the vineyard glows in moonlight, and you feel the first hints of that strange blend of laziness and inspiration that defines Dionysus. He lifts his cup, swirling the wine, watching its color shift like liquid sunset. Maybe he's imagining a story, a mortal who defies fate, or a hero who falls from pride. Maybe he's just thinking about what snacks pair best with fermented grapes. Either way, the idea is forming. And just as you're starting to drift, he chuckles softly and says, Mortals work too hard. Maybe if they watched a good play now and then, they'd remember how to live. He leans back, eyes half closed, as if the thought itself was labor enough for one eternity. The cicadas hum like background music, and the smell of crushed grapes lingers in the air. Tomorrow, he'll test this idea, maybe inspire a few mortals to dance, sing, act, and pretend it's all in his honor. Tonight, though, he'll nap under the stars, smug in the knowledge that he might have just invented the most entertaining form of laziness ever devised. Morning, or something like it, comes to the vineyard. The air smells faintly of fermented grapes and divine mischief. You stretch, brush the dew from your hair, and realize Dionysus hasn't moved an inch. He's still half buried under vine leaves, wearing the same lazy grin. The only sign of progress is that his goblet is now empty. When he finally stirs, it's not from motivation but from the sun getting in his eyes. Work, he mutters, is for people who can't delegate. And with that, he decides it's time to hire staff. Of course, hiring for divine projects is tricky. You can't just post an opening on Olympus's bulletin board, seeking mortals who can dance, sing, and handle existential ecstasy without vomiting. So Dionysus takes to wandering through olive groves, mountain villages, and port towns, recruiting anyone who looks like they might enjoy drinking for a living. That's how his famous entourage begins: satyrs with questionable boundaries, maenads who scream poetry at the moon, and a few bewildered shepherds who thought they were signing up for a catering gig. Together, they form the first unofficial cult of Dionysus, though cult might be too strong a word for what's basically an ongoing outdoor party with spiritual branding. You follow along as the god of wine introduces his new employees to their duties. The first rule: if you can't dance, just sway. The second: if you can't sing, hum dramatically. The third: if you can't act inspired, drink until you can. The plan works, sort of. The group travels from village to village, spreading the word that joy itself is sacred. And wherever they go, they host festivals, half ritual, half chaos. It starts with music, flutes, drums, and the occasional goat horn blown far too close to your ear. Then comes the procession, followers carrying ivy branches, baskets of fruit, and a few symbolic items that are probably best not explained. Finally, they perform small skits reenacting Dionysus's adventures, loosely based on myth, heavily based on improvisation. Historians still argue whether these early performances were actual theatre or just very dramatic parties. Archaeologists have found pottery from the 6th century BCE showing masked dancers in Dionysian processions, but nobody's sure if those masks meant performance, possession, or just good taste in accessories. Dionysus doesn't care about labels. To him, art and intoxication are twins. Both blur the line between self and story. When someone acts out a god's tale while tipsy, they lose their fear for a moment. They stop worrying about the field that needs ploughing, the debts owed, or the weather that never cooperates. For a few breaths, they are divine. A mainstream fact: many historians credit the dithyramb, a choral hymn sung in Dionysus's honor, as the direct ancestor of Greek tragedy. The idea of one singer stepping out of the chorus to speak directly to the audience may have been the first spark of dramatic dialogue. But Dionysus didn't invent the dithyramb for history books. He just wanted a good sing-along. One quirkier myth claims that during one of these festivals, the god became so entranced by his own music that he accidentally transformed a musician into a vine for missing a note. It was less a punishment and more a creative use of divine overreaction. You imagine the scene: the satyrs clapping off beat, the maenads twirling in circles, the smell of wine and sweat mingling with crushed herbs underfoot. And there's Dionysus, pretending to direct them but mostly holding another cup. His staff meetings quickly become legendary. They involve no agenda, no minutes, just hours of collective storytelling. Someone starts a myth. Once, the god of wine turned the sea into grapes. And before long, everyone's shouting ideas, contradicting each other, and laughing too hard to care. Out of this chaos, something structured begins to form. That's the paradox of Dionysus. Even his laziness produces creation. He's the god of disorder that somehow makes order possible. From the drunken blur of dance and chant, a pattern emerges. The mortals start to remember lines, repeat rhythms, practice gestures. They don't know it yet, but they're rehearsing. By dusk, the fields are glowing gold, and you're lying on the grass watching the sun sink behind rows of vines. Dionysus plops down beside you, grapes in hand, and sighs contentedly. "You see," he murmurs, "if you never rush, the world starts to perform for you." You're not sure if that's wisdom or wine talking, but it sounds true in the moment. A light breeze stirs the leaves, carrying laughter from the nearby camp. Somewhere, a flute plays again, its tune bending with the wind like a living thing. Tomorrow, the troupe will travel to another village. They'll sing the same songs, act out the same strange stories, and call it sacred theatre. And little by little, mortals will begin to treat these performances not as parties but as ritual art. It's hard to tell where work ends and worship begins, where play becomes performance. Dionysus, the laziest god on Olympus, has found the perfect loophole. When you turn joy into religion, you never have to clock in again. The road winds downhill from the vineyards toward a small village clinging to a slope of olive trees. The sun hangs low, gold and syrupy, and you can feel the collective buzz of anticipation. Dionysus's troupe has arrived, which means one thing: the locals will sleep poorly tonight but remember the laughter forever. You can see them gathering already: farmers, potters, even a few sheep who look suspiciously familiar from last night's ceremonies. The god himself strolls at the center, barefoot, his hair full of ivy, humming to himself as if the world exists solely for background harmony. You get the feeling that he's not arriving so much as allowing everyone else to notice him. The villagers welcome him with nervous reverence. They know the stories, how he can bless or curse, how he once turned a ship's crew into dolphins for doubting him. But tonight, he's smiling, holding out wine instead of wrath. He announces a new kind of worship, one that requires no temple, no priest, no blood, just a willingness to perform. And just like that, the mortals start imitating the gods. At first, it's awkward. The shepherd who's chosen to play Zeus keeps forgetting his lines. The baker cast as Hera can't stop giggling every time she's supposed to look jealous. A child steps forward to deliver a speech but sneezes halfway through and turns it into slapstick. Yet Dionysus beams like a proud director watching chaos become art. He declares it divine theatre, drama, he calls it, from the word dran, meaning to act. And suddenly, the village square becomes a stage. You watch from a low stone wall as the performance takes shape. The audience circles the players, their faces glowing in torchlight. The actors wear masks of bark and linen, smiling, frowning, sometimes both at once. They dance, shout, and occasionally trip, but the energy is contagious. For the first time, the villagers aren't just telling stories, they're becoming them. Historians still argue whether these early dramas were formal plays or spontaneous religious rites. Some scholars say the first actor stepped out from the chorus to speak as a character. Others claim it happened naturally, like conversation evolving into poetry. Either way, the idea spreads faster than Dionysus can refill his cup. The god looks at you and says, "They're not pretending. They're remembering." He explains that mortals need ritual to remember who they are. When they act out the divine, they brush against immortality, just long enough to believe they matter. It's the most serious thing he's ever said, and you almost drop your goblet. But before the moment can turn too profound, a satyr nearby falls off a stool, and Dionysus laughs so hard he nearly spills his drink. That's the secret of his religion. It's always a breath away from farce. A mainstream historical fact: by the 6th century BCE, Greek villages really did perform public dithyrambs, choral hymns dedicated to Dionysus. Over time, these evolved into structured contests, where performers competed to tell the god's stories best. This is how Athens eventually became the birthplace of Western drama. A quirky tidbit: one fragmentary account suggests the earliest theatre audiences paid admission not in money but in grapes. Imagine handing over a bunch of fruit instead of tickets. It's both adorable and efficient. As the play continues, something curious happens. The villagers' laughter softens into awe. A scene about Dionysus's birth, a mortal mother burned by Zeus's lightning, makes a few people tear up. Even the actors seem surprised by the emotion rising between them. Dionysus notices it too. His expression shifts, the lazy smile giving way to quiet wonder. He didn't expect this. He just wanted entertainment. But here, among flickering torches and stumbling mortals, something ancient and holy stirs. He leans toward you and whispers, "See? They think they're acting, but they're confessing." And he's right. The farmer playing Zeus suddenly starts shouting about his failing crops. The baker-turned hero weeps about her husband's wandering eye. The play has turned real. It's part therapy, part art, part divine intervention. By the end, no one's sure if they've watched a performance or lived through one. The crowd disperses slowly, some laughing, some quiet. Dionysus sits back, eyes half closed, humming the same tune from a vineyard. You think he might finally feel a spark of divine purpose, but then he stretches, yawns, and says, "Tomorrow we'll do a sequel." Historians still debate whether these early Dionysian rites were moral lessons or just escapism in fancy dress. But what's certain is that something new was born that night, a fusion of worship, storytelling, and art that would ripple through centuries. The god doesn't look like he's planning a cultural revolution. He looks like a man who just discovered that doing less somehow achieved more. Maybe that's what genius really is, divine laziness with good timing. As the last torch burns out, you lie on the cool ground, the scent of smoke and crushed grapes thick in the air. Dionysus hums himself back towards sleep, and for a moment, the whole world feels like an after-party at the edge of creation. You wake to the sound of hammers and laughter. The smell of wine still lingers, but the air is different, more structured, almost civic. You're not in a tiny village anymore. You're in Athens, the city that never misses a chance to turn chaos into culture. And today, it's hosting something massive, the city Dionysia. Dionysus strolls through the bustling streets like he owns them. And technically, for this week, he does. Everywhere you look, there are garlands of ivy, banners painted with masks, and vendors selling amphorae of cheap wine that probably violate every divine health code. It's equal parts parade, pep rally, and poetry slam. The god looks almost bashful about it. "It started as a small thing," he mumbles. "Just a few songs, a few dances. Now, it's a 5-day extravaganza with thousands of spectators, politicians pretending to be art lovers, and playwrights arguing over who's the most tragic." You suspect Dionysus secretly loves it. The morning begins with processions. Cows, goats, and baskets of grapes parade through the streets, symbols of abundance and also snacks for later. Priests walk solemnly beside musicians playing flutes and lyres, the melodies curling through the air like incense. At the front, a giant wooden statue of Dionysus is wheeled into the theatre precinct, his carved smile looking just a little too smug. You trail behind the crowd, watching as the entire city transforms. Merchants close shops, sailors dock ships, even philosophers pause their debates. Athens becomes one vast stage, a collective dream performed under the god's watchful eyes. Historians still argue whether the city Dionysia began as a political move to unite Athens or as a genuine act of devotion. Maybe it was both. Ancient festivals often walk that line, faith wrapped around civic pride, belief disguised as bureaucracy. Dionysus seems pleased either way. He lounges on a marble bench overlooking the newly built theatre of stone, a massive semicircle carved into the hillside, seating thousands. The view is breathtaking, the sea glittering below, the Acropolis watching from above. You can almost feel the hum of potential, the energy of stories waiting to be told. A mainstream fact, by the 5th century BCE, the city Dionysia had become the centerpiece of Athenian life. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides presented their works here, blending myth, philosophy, and civic commentary. Attendance was mandatory for citizens. It was considered an act of piety and patriotism rolled into one. A quirky tidbit. During one festival, a playwright bribed a rival's actor to purposely forget his lines. The scandal was so infamous that Athens briefly considered regulating dramatic sabotage. You can imagine Dionysus snickering through the whole thing, pretending to be impartial. Back in the crowd, you see the actors preparing. They adjust their linen masks, oversized expressions painted in red and black. Each performer represents not just a character but an emotion itself: grief, joy, rage, awe. The chorus, 24 strong, warms up by chanting a rhythmic ode that shakes the marble under your feet. Then, silence. The first actor steps forward, his voice echoing through the open air. He begins a tale of kings and curses, of fate and folly. You can feel Dionysus's attention sharpen. This is the fruit of his laziness. Mortals doing the emotional labor while he reaps divine credit. And yet, there's something deeper stirring in him. He leans forward, eyes wide, as if realizing the audience is worshipping not just him, but the power of story itself. For a moment, even the god of drama seems humbled. But then the crowd erupts at a particularly dramatic twist. Someone's mother is secretly their aunt or something, and Dionysus relaxes again. "Perfect," he murmurs. Tragic confusion always sells. As the day unfolds, tragedy gives way to dithyrambs, choral songs that honor Dionysus directly. The performers sway like waves, their voices weaving through the sunlight. The god smiles, his lazy grin softening into genuine affection. "They work so hard," he whispers, "just to imitate my leisure." Historians still debate whether the theatre served as mass therapy for Athens, a place where citizens could collectively process their fears and failures. Some scholars call it the city's emotional engine, an annual release valve for all the pressure of democracy, war, and philosophy. You just know it feels right. You watch thousands of faces in the audience, merchants, mothers, soldiers, slaves, all bound by a single shared emotion. Tragedy doesn't separate them. It synchronizes their hearts. Dionysus has given humanity something they didn't know they needed, a ritual of empathy. As the sun sets, torches flicker to life around the theatre. The marble glows like honey. The chorus begins their final hymn, praising the god of wine and wonder. Dionysus stretches, satisfied, and says, "Maybe I'll call this a tax write-off." He closes his eyes, letting the music wash over him, and you sense the faint hum of eternity in the applause. Tomorrow, he'll think about masks and actors and ways to make the whole thing even less work for himself. But tonight, he lets the mortals do the heavy lifting, emotionally, spiritually, and dramatically. The night deepens. The crowd disperses. And in the quiet that follows, you realize that theatre was never about entertainment. It was about finding meaning in messiness, beauty in failure, and rest in reflection. Dionysus might have invented it to avoid work, but somehow, he ended up creating the most human art of all. Morning again, and the amphitheatre still smells faintly of wine, dust, and ambition. You wake on one of the stone benches. Apparently, Dionysus's definition of VIP seating is wherever he last fell asleep. Around you, the actors are already at it again, rehearsing scenes that sound like arguments in poetic form. Dionysus watches them with mild amusement, one eyebrow arched, his goblet refilled. Delegation, he says, stretching, is the highest art. He points toward the stage. They perform. I inspire. Everyone wins. You have to admit, it's clever. The god has turned mortals into his personal storytellers. The actors, masked and costumed, speak his truths while he lounges nearby pretending to manage creative direction. It's the age of masks now. Thick painted faces of linen and plaster hang from wooden poles, each exaggerated, smiles too wide, frowns too deep. The audience can see emotions from 50 rows away. But the real magic isn't the expression, it's what happens when someone wears it. You watch a young actor, nervous, sweaty, maybe 17, pull on a mask of a tragic hero. The moment it covers his face, his posture shifts. He straightens, voice deepens, gestures sharpen. The mask doesn't hide him, it frees him. Dionysus notices too. They're learning to lose themselves, he murmurs. That's how you find truth. Historians still argue whether masks in Greek theatre represented divine possession or practical acoustics. Some say the open mouths amplified voices. Others claim the actors believed they were literally channeling gods. Either way, you feel the chill of something ancient in the air, a merging of art and spirit. A mainstream fact, the first professional actor credited by name was Thespis, around 534 BCE. He's said to have stepped out of the chorus and spoken as a character rather than a narrator, effectively inventing acting. That's why we still call performers thespians. A quirky tidbit. Legend says Thespis travelled with a portable cart that served as both stage and dressing room. Between towns, he'd stop and perform solo tragedies for farmers, goats, and occasionally confused chickens. Dionysus probably found it hilarious, and secretly inspiring. You sit beside the god as the actors rehearse, their lines full of fate and fury. Dionysus critiques them with lazy precision. More anguish, less shouting. Remember, you're supposed to feel doomed, not announce it. He waves a hand dismissively, then whispers to you, "Honestly, mortals think suffering is an art form. I just call it Monday." But despite his teasing, there's affection in his voice. These performers, sweating under the Athenian sun, are giving birth to a new art form, and he knows it. He's found his temple, his worshippers, his sacred ritual, and none of it requires paperwork. As the rehearsal continues, a small accident occurs. One actor, too caught up in emotion, steps too close to the edge of the wooden stage. It collapses with a splintering crack, dumping him into the orchestra pit. For a moment, everyone freezes. Then, Dionysus bursts out laughing. "Perfect," he roars. "Tragedy and slapstick. Keep it." It's a reminder that even divine innovation has its rough edges. Greek theatre may look timeless to you, but here in its infancy, it's just a chaotic experiment held together by passion, wine, and stubbornness. Historians still debate how much of this early drama was scripted versus improvised. Some believe the plays were meticulously written. Others think they evolved organically from chants and gestures. Dionysus, if asked, would probably shrug and say, both. Depends how late the wine ran out. By noon, the rehearsal becomes a full performance. The audience trickles in, artisans, soldiers, curious children, all eager for their daily dose of emotion. The story is a familiar one. A hero defies the gods, pays dearly, and everyone cries cathartically before heading home for olives and gossip. As the hero delivers his final monologue, something about destiny and doom, you feel the strange pull of collective empathy again. The air vibrates with shared feeling. Dionysus leans forward, chin in hand, eyes shining with that lazy satisfaction of a creator who's done nothing yet achieved everything. You see, he whispers, they suffer so I don't have to. It's half joke, half truth. Dionysus doesn't need to face hardship directly. He's outsourced it to art. Theatre has become his mirror, reflecting all the chaos and pain he'd rather nap through. When the play ends, the audience applauds wildly, stamping feet, shouting praise to both actors and God. Dionysus stands, finally, some divine participation, and gives a lazy bow. Excellent work, he says. We'll call it tragedy. You ask why that word. He grins. Because we sacrificed a goat this morning, and it didn't go well. That's not a joke. Tragoidia literally means goat song. The earliest tragic competitions often included goat sacrifices as part of the ritual. Scholars still argue whether the goat was a prize, an offering, or simply an unlucky mascot. As twilight falls, the actors remove their masks, their faces pale and sweaty, their eyes strangely distant. You realize that for them, theatre isn't just performance, it's transformation. They step into gods, kings, fools, and come back changed. Dionysus watches, pleased but quiet. He knows he's done something monumental, even if he'd never call it work. He's created a machine for empathy, a playground for souls, a holy excuse for mortals to feel everything at once. And as he stretches, yawns, and settles back onto his marble bench, he mutters, tomorrow, maybe comedy. This tragedy thing's exhausting. By the next morning, the air in Athens feels lighter, like the city itself has exhaled after too much tragedy. The marble gleams, the wine cellars are already restocking their amphorae, and Dionysus looks genuinely refreshed, which is unusual for a god whose main workout routine is reclining. He's lounging again in the theatre seats, of course, his goblet refilled, and the same actors from yesterday stumbling in, looking emotionally dehydrated. Enough doom, he declares, waving a grape at them like a royal scepter. Let's give people something to laugh about. Life's tragic enough without rehearsal. And just like that, comedy is born, half accident, half protest against sadness. You follow him to the stage, where props from the tragic play still lie scattered. Masks of grief, fake swords, symbolic urns. Dionysus surveys the mess, then starts laughing. Perfect, he says. Keep it all. We'll just use it wrong. The first comedy is chaos. Actors improvise wildly, mocking the same tragic heroes who made everyone cry yesterday. One man plays a pompous king slipping on spilled wine. Another pretends to argue with Zeus about taxes. The chorus bursts into laughter mid-song, their dance steps turning into exaggerated pratfalls. And the audience? They love it. Laughter rolls through the amphitheatre like thunder softened by joy. People double over, clutching their sides, tears streaming from eyes that yesterday wept for Oedipus and Medea. Dionysus beams, utterly delighted. See, he says. Same emotions. Just rearranged. Historians still argue whether comedy evolved from phallic songs sung during rural festivals or as deliberate parody of tragic performances. The truth, as usual, probably sits tipsy between the two. A mainstream fact, Aristophanes, one of the earliest comic playwrights, used humor to comment on politics, war, and even religion. His plays mocked everyone, from generals to philosophers to gods. And yet, somehow, the audience laughed instead of rioting. A quirky tidbit. Some early comedies featured actors wearing enormous leather phalluses as costumes, symbols of fertility and satire. It sounds absurd, but Dionysus approved wholeheartedly, calling it both sacred and hilarious. He even joins in sometimes, appearing on stage in disguise, pretending to be himself, pretending to be mortal. One ancient myth claims he once crashed a performance to correct a bad punchline, declaring, "If you must joke about Zeus, at least get the lightning timing right." The audience didn't know whether to bow or applaud. They did both. You can see that same blend of reverence and chaos in every laugh. Comedy becomes a sacred outlet, a way to poke fun at fear itself. It's permission to be ridiculous in a world ruled by fate. As the performance continues, Dionysus lounges on the steps, lazily orchestrating the madness. One actor forgets his line, so Dionysus shouts the wrong one on purpose. Another drops his prop mask, and the god replaces it with a bunch of grapes. "Better," he says. Tragedy is when you lose your crown. Comedy is when you trip over it. Historians still debate whether Dionysian comedy was subversive or devotional. Was it rebellion against authority, or worship disguised as mockery? Maybe both. After all, laughter, like wine, dissolves barriers. It levels kings and beggars alike. You notice something subtle in the crowd. When they laugh at the pompous hero, they're not just entertained, they're freed. For a moment, power structures fade, grief softens, and everyone's ridiculous humanity shines through. The chorus finishes with a bawdy dance, the crowd erupts again, and Dionysus rises to take a mock bow. And that, he says, is how you turn suffering into business. You shake your head, smiling. You really invented an entire art form just to procrastinate, didn't you? He grins, unbothered. Procrastination is just divine pacing. As the sun dips low, painting everything gold, the actors gather around him for feedback. He tells them to drink more next time. You can't fake joy sober, and to make the gods the butt of more jokes. They need it, he adds. Zeus hasn't laughed since lightning was new. Later, as the festival winds down, Dionysus wanders through the emptying streets. The masks are hung up, the torches dimmed, the air still buzzing with echoes of laughter. He stops to watch a group of children acting out scenes from the play, their giggles bouncing off the marble walls. "See," he murmurs, "they're copying the copies of me. That's almost work." He stretches, yawns, and gestures at the half-built stage. "Let them handle the building," he says. "I'll handle the inspiration." In that moment, you realize something quietly profound. Dionysus didn't just create theater, he created the blueprint for art itself. Tragedy gives catharsis, comedy gives relief. Both remind humans that life is survivable, even when it's absurd. As the last light fades, Dionysus pours a final cup of wine and hands it to you. "To the art of not taking anything too seriously," he says. The liquid glows like molten gold. You drink, and for a heartbeat, the world feels soft and weightless, like the pause between laughter and sleep. The morning after the laughter still hums faintly through the city, like the echo of a song you can't quite stop humming. The stage smells of spilled wine and trampled petals, and Dionysus looks around with the satisfied air of someone who has successfully created a reason never to hold a real job again. He stretches, gestures vaguely toward the actors cleaning up, and declares, "Art sustains the soul, and conveniently, it sustains me, too." You follow him through the marketplace, where merchants are now quoting lines from last night's comedies to sell their fish and figures. One even shouts, "By now or Zeus will smite your dinner." And the crowd laughs, tossing him coins. And that's when it happens. Mortals start making jokes about the gods themselves. It begins small, with gentle ribbing, funny little songs about Hermes losing his sandals or Aphrodite's mirror cracking. But soon, someone gets bold. A play called The Frogs features Dionysus himself as a character, bumbling through the underworld. The real Dionysus, naturally, attends opening night. He sits in the front row, disguised in a floppy hat and dark cloak, a disguise so obvious it's almost performance art. As the play unfolds, the mortal version of him fumbles, stumbles, and complains about divine responsibilities. The audience roars with laughter, especially when Dionysus misquotes his own commandments. The real god leans over to you, grinning. "They get my voice wrong," he whispers. "But the attitude? Perfect." Historians still argue whether The Frogs by Aristophanes was mockery or praise. On one hand, it made the god of theatre look foolish. On the other, it celebrated his art by putting him center stage. Either way, Dionysus adored it. A mainstream fact, ancient Greek comedies were deeply political and often performed during public festivals funded by wealthy citizens. These plays didn't just entertain, They commented on democracy, war, and everyday life. To be laughed at by Athens was, in a strange way, an honor. A quirky tidbit. Some performers wore padded bellies and comically large posteriors to exaggerate their characters' foolishness. Theatergoers loved it so much that sculptors later immortalized those shapes in terracotta figurines. Tiny, laughing echoes of the festival. As night falls again, you walk with Dionysus through the flickering lamplight of Athens. He listens to street performers retelling mythic scenes as jokes. Zeus getting tricked by mortals, Poseidon misplacing his trident at sea. Good, Dionysus murmurs. Let them laugh at us. Fear is boring. He stops beside a temple where an old priest scowls at the sound of laughter nearby. Theater used to be solemn, the man mutters. Now it's noisy. Dionysus winks. Noise is devotion with better timing. You stifle a laugh as the god slips away before the priest can respond. Back at the amphitheater, preparations are already underway for the next performance. Wooden beams creak, paint fumes hang in the air, and a flock of goats grazes nearby, apparently part of the rehearsal. Someone's arguing about the chorus choreography. Another actor is trying to find his missing mask. It's chaos, but Dionysus looks thrilled. He perches on the stage edge and muses aloud. Comedy keeps them honest. You can't hide behind titles when people laugh at you. You think about how dangerous that idea is in a world of proud kings and touchy gods. And yet, the audience keeps returning. Perhaps because laughter is safer than rebellion, or perhaps because it feels the same in the chest, that uncontrollable shake, that release. Historians still debate whether comedy was tolerated by Olympus because it honored Dionysus or simply because the gods enjoyed a good roast. Some claim Zeus only allowed it because he assumed all the jokes were about Poseidon. The play begins. The chorus bursts onto the stage wearing absurd masks, huge noses, grinning mouths, and the crowd immediately erupts into laughter. Someone trips on a prop goat. Someone else improvises a joke about Athens' latest tax law. And when an actor dressed as Dionysus waddles across the stage, clutching a wine jug twice his size, the real Dionysus applauds loudly. That's me, he says proudly. Finally, some honest theater. Between laughs, you glimpse something deeper in him. Behind the humor, there's a flicker of tenderness, the satisfaction of seeing mortals turn divine chaos into community, satire into survival. Comedy, you realize, isn't just escape. It's a mirror polished with mischief. When the play ends, Dionysus stands, stretching his arms wide to the stars. They mock me because they love me, he says softly. No one jokes about a god they've forgotten. You walk home together under the indigo sky. He hums to himself, a low, lazy tune that sounds suspiciously like applause. Somewhere behind you, the audience's laughter fades into the city's heartbeat. You know, you say, you really did invent an entire civilization's entertainment industry just to dodge paperwork. He chuckles. And they call me dramatic. The night wind rustles through olive branches. The wine amphorae clink faintly in passing carts. And as the god of theater slips his arm around your shoulder, you realize that maybe, in the grand scheme of divine labor, bringing laughter into the world is the one kind of work worth doing. By the time the next festival rolls around, the theater of Dionysus looks more like a construction site than a shrine. Mortals have decided that bigger is better, and now the once simple wooden stage has turned into a sprawling maze of scaffolds, pulleys, and half-painted backdrops. Dionysus lounges on a marble step, swirling his wine, watching the chaos unfold like it's the best show in town. You sit beside him, shielding your face from sawdust as a worker yells, "Don't lean on that beam, it's still wet." A moment later, the entire thing collapses in slow motion, scattering actors, goats, and props in a heroic burst of splinters. Dionysus just claps politely. "Ah," he says. "Tragedy in rehearsal. Perfect." This, apparently, is what progress looks like, trial by slapstick. The Athenians have become obsessed with stagecraft. They're building trapdoors, mechanical cranes, the famous mechane, and sound devices to imitate thunder. Historians still argue whether the earliest thunder effect involved rolling stones across hollow wooden boxes or just an unfortunate in turn with a drum. A mainstream fact, the Greeks invented much of what we still use in theater today: revolving scenery, stage elevators, and complex acoustics that allowed an actor's voice to reach thousands of listeners. For a civilization without microphones, that's impressive. A quirky tidbit: one Athenian engineer once proposed using live goats as movable scenery, painting their sides to look like rocky hills. The plan was abandoned when the goats kept eating the costumes. You watch as Dionysus strolls through the confusion, occasionally helping by giving unhelpful advice. More drama, he shouts at a carpenter. The stairs should feel emotional. Then, spotting a frazzled stage manager, he adds, "Don't worry about the collapsing platform. It's a metaphor for human existence." The rehearsals drag on for days. Actors forget their lines, masks break, the painted backdrop of Mount Olympus falls forward mid-scene and flattens a very nervous musician. No one's hurt, but the sound makes the audience gasp, then laugh, then applaud. Dionysus, delighted, waves his goblet and declares it officially part of the performance. "See," he says to you, grinning, "every mistake is art if you don't apologize." Historians still debate whether ancient plays were scripted word for word or heavily improvised. Evidence suggests both. Some actors memorized lines, others simply followed the rhythm of the chorus and hoped the gods filled in the rest. By now, the festival has turned into a civic marathon. Judges take notes. Wealthy patrons compete to fund the most elaborate productions. And yet, beneath the golden ceremony, the spirit of Dionysus lingers. Wine, laughter, and the sacred joy of things falling slightly apart. The afternoon sun burns hot against the marble seats, and the smell of olive oil and sweat drifts through the crowd. A play begins, a serious one, full of moral lessons and divine punishment. But halfway through, the wind catches a painted backdrop and sends it flying into the audience like a celestial bedsheet. Everyone gasps. Then someone starts laughing. Another joins in. The solemn tragedy dissolves into chaos, and even the actors start cracking up. Dionysus throws back his head and laughs until he nearly spills his drink. "Art," he says proudly, "is just divine accidents pretending to be planned." He saunters backstage to check on the damage, stepping over broken props and a dazed chorus member who mutters, "Was that supposed to happen?" Dionysus pats his shoulder. "Always," he says, "especially when it wasn't." You trail behind him, noticing the makeshift pulley system dangling from above. "You know," you murmur, "for someone avoiding work, you've created an entire infrastructure." He smirks. "Delegation, my friend. The highest form of laziness." Still, there's something oddly beautiful about it all. Amid the hammering, the laughter, the constant rebuilding, the theater feels alive, like a living organism fueled by mistakes. Mortals keep innovating, not because they're ordered to, but because they can't stop chasing the thrill of spectacle. As night falls, the amphitheater glows under torchlight. You sit beside Dionysus again as the chorus performs, their voices rising and falling like waves. Behind them, the city hums, streets alive with vendors, children reenacting scenes with clay masks, the smell of roasted figs drifting on the breeze. For a fleeting moment, everything sinks. Divine laziness, mortal ambition, creative chaos. You realize that this glorious imperfection, is exactly what Dionysus wanted. Not order, not hierarchy, just endless, joyous creation with a healthy dose of wine and failure. The god sighs contentedly. "Do you know what I love about mortals?" he asks. "What's that?" "They ruin everything," he says softly. "And then they make it beautiful again." A gust of wind lifts a few parchments from the stage. They flutter upward, catching the torchlight like glowing moths before drifting into the night. Dionysus watches them go, smiling faintly. Somewhere, another beam creaks ominously. Someone yells, "Not again." And the set collapses once more. He raises his cup. "To theatre," he says, "the only job where failure sells tickets." You can't help but laugh as wine spills, the chorus screams, and the curtain falls, literally this time. Morning comes to Athens with the kind of sunlight that makes marble glow and hangovers feel philosophical. The amphitheater still smells faintly of wine and olive oil, and the actors wander like sleepwalkers, clutching scripts that look more like laundry lists. Dionysus is already awake. Well, half awake, leaning against a column with a grin that says, "I caused culture again, didn't I?" You join him, watching as a group of young philosophers loiter at the edge of the theater, clearly judging everything. Dionysus squints. "Ah," he says, "the critics have arrived." They're not ordinary hecklers, though. These are the minds that will soon reshape Greek thought, Socrates, Plato, and their perpetually unimpressed entourage. They watch the performers rehearse a farce about Hera's jealousy and Zeus's habit of turning into animals. Dionysus finds it hilarious. Plato does not. Socrates crosses his arms. "This," he says, "is dangerous." Dionysus raises an eyebrow. "Dangerous? It's a man pretending to be a donkey." "Exactly," Socrates says. "It encourages illusion. The audience forgets truth." Dionysus sips his wine. "Truth is overrated. Illusion has better lighting." You can't help smiling as the two of them spar, their words spiraling like smoke. Historians still argue whether Socrates truly despised theatre or simply feared its influence on impressionable minds. Some sources say he attended plays regularly but always muttered about moral decay on the way home. A mainstream fact, Plato later banned poets and dramatists from his ideal republic, claiming they corrupted reason and distracted citizens from virtue. His student Aristotle, on the other hand, defended theatre as emotional medicine, a way for people to purge their feelings safely. The eternal debate between logic and art began here, beneath the Athenian sun. A quirky tidbit: ancient audiences sometimes threw figs or bread at actors they didn't like, not out of malice, but because it was cheaper than applause. Dionysus thought it was a fair exchange. "They give you snacks for effort," he once joked. The rehearsal continues, oblivious to the philosophical showdown unfolding nearby. An actor mispronounces Olympus and accidentally invents a swear word. The chorus bursts into laughter. Socrates sighs dramatically. Dionysus applauds. "Now that is enlightenment," he declares. "You notice how differently the god views the world. For him, theatre isn't deception, it's translation. Mortals can't see divine chaos directly, so they perform it, shape it, laugh through it. It's messy, sure, but it's honest in its own way." Dionysus leans towards Socrates. "You think they forget truth," he says quietly. "I think they remember it by pretending." Socrates frowns, considering. Pretending to be virtuous is not the same as being virtuous. Dionysus grins. Tell that to every philosopher pretending not to enjoy themselves. For a moment, even Socrates smiles, which, by his standards, is an emotional confession. Historians still debate whether Dionysus truly represents chaos or liberation. To the philosophers, he was indulgence personified. To his worshippers, he was divine empathy, the god who broke barriers between sacred and ridiculous, reminding everyone that joy was as holy as wisdom. You walk with him later through the Agora, where vendors are quoting last night's comedies while selling olives. Theatre has become woven into daily life. People reference plays the way modern folks quote movies. Dionysus watches them with fond amusement. "They've turned art into gossip," he murmurs. "Perfect." He passes a group of students arguing whether heroes should cry on stage. One insists real men never weep. Another says that's exactly why they should. Dionysus stops, tosses them a cluster of grapes, and says, "Let it out. Nothing grows in stone." That night, another performance fills the theatre. This one is meant to be tragic again, a story of betrayal, loss, and divine punishment. The audience sits in reverent silence. But mid-scene, someone sneezes loudly. The lead actor pauses, then solemnly improvises, "Bless you, mortal soul." The crowd dissolves into laughter. Dionysus chuckles beside you. They can't help it anymore. Once laughter enters the blood, it stays. He looks proud, not of the spectacle, but of the transformation. What began as divine laziness has become humanity's heartbeat. Stories that reflect, distort, and heal. After the play, Socrates approaches him once more. "You've given them something powerful," he admits. "But what if they use it wrong?" Dionysus smiles softly. "Then it's still a story worth watching." Socrates tilts his head, thoughtful. "You sound like a philosopher." "I sound," Dionysus says, "like someone who's been drinking near philosophers too long." The night ends with laughter echoing against marble, long after the torches fade. You feel it linger, a kind of balance between reason and chaos, intellect and emotion. The gods debate truth, the mortals live it through masks. And as Dionysus leans back, eyes half closed, you realize he's achieved something no other Olympian has. He's made imperfection sacred. "See," he murmurs, "even wisdom needs an audience." You look at him, half drunk on the moment, and think maybe, just maybe, the god of wine and theatre understood humanity better than the philosophers ever could. By now, years have passed in the way that time blurs when there's always a festival to plan. Athens has changed, philosophers come and go, wars flare and fade, but the theatre remains. The same stone seats, the same open sky, the same faint smell of olives and dust and incense. And always, somewhere in the shadows, Dionysus watching, grinning, doing absolutely nothing productive and yet changing everything. You find him one afternoon perched atop a crumbling column, sipping from a clay cup as workers repair the stage again. Still avoiding real labor, you ask. He raises his eyebrows. This is work.
I'm supervising eternity.
You laugh, sitting beside him as the wind rustles through the vines climbing the old marble. Below, a new generation of actors rehearses, some earnest, some bored, all devoted. They wear masks so bright the sunlight flares off them like halos. A mainstream fact, the masks of Greek theatre weren't just artistic, they amplified sound, designed with open mouths to project the actor's voice to the back rows. A perfect blend of ritual and engineering. A quirky tidbit, the ancient Greeks sometimes buried small terracotta theatre masks with the dead, as if giving them something to watch in the afterlife. The ultimate eternal matinee. Dionysus tilts his head, watching a nervous young actor stumble over line. I love this part, he says softly. The part where they almost give up. You watch too. The actor steadies himself, breathes, and starts again. His voice carries, clear and trembling, across the amphitheatre. The others join in, their movements synchronized, their chorus precise. For a moment, it's perfect, pure harmony between effort and accident. The god exhales, eyes glinting. They'll think they invented this feeling themselves, he murmurs. That's the best part. The play ends. The crowd erupts. Flowers and fig leaves rain onto the stage. Dionysus doesn't take credit. He never does. He only smiles, invisible now to most, content in the background hum of applause. Historians still argue whether Dionysus was ever real in the way other gods were. Some say he was just a personified idea, the human need for release, for emotion, for organized chaos. But here, sitting beside him, watching mortals laugh and weep in the same breath, you can't help thinking, if gods are shaped by what humans love most, then Dionysus might be the truest of them all. He stretches, yawns, and gestures at the sunset spilling across the city. Not bad, he says. 10,000 years of storytelling just so I wouldn't have to do paperwork. You grin. Worth it. Oh, he says, smiling faintly, you have no idea. The theatre empties. The actors pack their masks, the audience drifts home, and the torches burn low. Dionysus rises, brushing grape leaves from his hair. It's funny, he murmurs, how something born out of laziness became humanity's favorite ritual. He pauses, looking down at the empty seats. Every laugh, every tear, that's prayer, in its own messy way. Then he looks at you. And tomorrow, they'll start again, because the world's too heavy not to be turned into stories. The stars appear above the Acropolis, the wind carrying faint echoes of music and laughter from distant taverns. Dionysus sets his cup down gently, like a curtain closing. And as the night settles over the marble, you realize he's right. Theatre never ends. It's the same story retold forever, about joy and loss and the beautiful laziness of a god who taught mortals how to feel. He leans back against the column, eyes half-lidded. You should probably rest, he says. Tomorrow we improvise again. You nod, feeling the weight of centuries in your bones, and the rhythm of applause still pulsing faintly in the air. The night deepens around the ancient theatre, soft as velvet, the torches guttering out one by one. You can still smell the faint sweetness of wine, the dust of marble warmed by a day's sunlight now cooling under the stars. The noise of the festival has faded into memory, leaving only the whisper of the wind through the olive trees. Dionysus has gone quiet, his silhouette almost dissolving into the darkness. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's just pretending to be. You breathe slowly, matching the rhythm of the night, the rise and fall, the gentle weight of quiet that follows laughter. Somewhere far below, a chorus bird calls once, twice, then stops. You think of all those centuries of actors and audiences, each heartbeat a line in a play that never truly ends. Every performance, every clumsy costume, every forgotten word, it all becomes one long exhale of humanity. The stars seem closer now. They glow like soft stage lights on an empty set. You imagine the curtain lowering over the world, slow and graceful. The applause fades. The god smiles, faint and content. You let your eyes close. The marble beneath you feels cool, the air still humming with the last traces of laughter. Tomorrow there will be another festival, another play. Another mortal trying to make sense of the world with words and masks. But for now, everything is still. You are weightless. The story rests. The god of theatre drifts back into myth, and you drift into sleep.